Have you ever sat across the dinner table from your own child and realized she'd been robbing your grandchild blind, and smiling about it the whole time? I'm 74 years old. I've buried a husband, survived a broken hip, and taught third grade for 41 years in Beaumont, Texas. I thought I'd seen every kind of lie a person could tell. But sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching my daughter Linda pass the cranberry sauce like nothing was wrong, that was the moment I understood there was a kind of dishonesty I'd never encountered before. The kind that lives inside someone you raised. Linda was holding court that evening, the way she always does. She had her reading glasses perched on her nose, a stack of papers next to her plate, and that particular voice she uses when she wants everyone to think she's the responsible one. "I've been going over the family trust," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "And after consulting with a financial advisor, it's clear that the most prudent path forward is to consolidate the remaining assets under one manager. That's me." She turned to my granddaughter Carly, who was 26 years old and sitting at the far end of the table with her hands folded in her lap. "I know Daddy wanted you to have a share, sweetheart, but the numbers just don't work that way anymore." Carly's face went white. She looked at me. I looked back at her. And I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because sitting in my purse, underneath the table, was a manila folder that was about to end Linda's little performance. But I wasn't ready to open it. Not until everyone had their plates full and their ears open. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. Let me take you back 6 months, to the day I got out of the hospital and started to realize something was very, very wrong. My husband Earl passed away 3 years before all of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and mean. He was a quiet man who worked with his hands, ran a small peach orchard on 12 acres east of town, and owned a rental property on Crane Street that brought in steady income every month. He wasn't wealthy by any measure, but he was careful. And he loved 2 people more than anything in this world, me and our granddaughter Carly. Earl set up a family trust before he died. It was simple and clear. The peach orchard and the rental property would be held in trust, managed by me as sole trustee, and split equally between our daughter Linda and our granddaughter Carly when the time was right. He told me this sitting on the back porch one evening, about 2 months before he died. He said, "Make sure Carly gets her share. Linda's got a good life. Good husband. Nice house. Carly's just getting started. She'll need this." I promised him I would. For 2 years after Earl's death, things ran smoothly. I managed the trust, collected rent from the Crane Street property every month, and kept the orchard maintained with the help of a local crew that Earl had worked with for years. Carly was finishing nursing school in Houston, calling me every Sunday like clockwork. And Linda was living comfortably in a big house on the west side of town with her husband Gerald, who sold insurance and drove a brand new truck every 2 years. Linda never showed much interest in the trust. She'd ask once or twice a year how things were going, and I'd tell her everything was fine. That seemed to be enough for her. But looking back now, there were small things I should have noticed. Linda started making comments about the orchard, how much it cost to maintain, how the peach market wasn't what it used to be, how 12 acres of land that close to town was worth more as a development site than a fruit farm. She said these things casually, usually over Sunday lunch, like she was just thinking out loud. I brushed them off. I wish I hadn't. Then, in February, I fell. Stepped off the back porch wrong on a wet morning and shattered my left hip. The pain was like nothing I'd ever felt, white hot, all-consuming. Surgery came the next day, then rehab, then 6 weeks in a recovery facility with physical therapists who made me do exercises that brought tears to my eyes. I couldn't manage anything from that bed. Couldn't drive, couldn't walk to the mailbox, could barely hold a pen through the haze of pain medication. So I did what I thought was the safe and loving thing. I gave Linda temporary power of attorney. Just to keep the bills paid and the property managed while I healed. I signed the papers in my hospital room, with a notary Linda had brought along. Linda patted my hand and said, "Don't worry about a thing, Mama. I'll take care of everything. You just focus on getting better." And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. The first sign something was off came just 2 weeks later. Carly called me at the rehab center and said she'd driven out to the orchard to check on things and found the gate locked with a brand new padlock. She didn't have the combination. She called Linda, who told her, "Don't worry about it. I had the locks changed for security." Carly thought it was odd but didn't push it. I didn't think much of it either. I was on pain medication and barely keeping my eyes open most days. The second sign came a month later. I asked Linda for the monthly rent statement from the Crane Street property. She paused on the phone, just half a second too long, and then said the tenant had moved out and the place was sitting empty. "I'll find someone new when you're back on your feet," she said. No rush. Something in her voice was too smooth. Too rehearsed. Like she'd been waiting for me to ask that exact question and had the answer locked and loaded. I knew what the rent on that property was, $1,800 a month. That was $1,800 a month that had stopped appearing, and nobody had thought to tell me until I asked. That's the kind of detail that keeps a retired schoolteacher up at night. I came home in April. The house was clean, the fridge was stocked, and Linda had left a vase of fresh flowers on the counter with a card that said, "Welcome home, Mama." Everything looked perfect. And that was exactly what made me uneasy. Because in 41 years of teaching children, I learned one thing that never failed me: when everything looks too perfect, someone is hiding something. The first thing I did when I had the strength to drive again was visit the orchard. I used to go out there every Sunday after church. Earl and I would walk through the rows of peach trees together, and after he died, I kept the habit. It was my way of being close to him. When I pulled up to the gate, I saw a new sign wired to the fence. Private property, no trespassing, L. Whitfield. Whitfield is Linda's married name. My name is on that deed. Hargrave. Earl's name is on that deed. Hargrave. There was no reason in the world for Linda's married name to be on a sign at that orchard. I sat in my car for 5 minutes with the engine running, staring at that sign. Then I drove straight to the Jefferson County Clerk's office. I asked to see the deed records for the orchard property on Farm Road 1122. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes and a county lanyard around her neck, pulled them up on her screen and turned the monitor toward me. And there it was. The deed had been transferred from the Hargrave Family Trust to Linda Marie Whitfield. Date of transfer, March 14th. While I was lying in a rehab bed doing leg exercises and eating hospital jello. I gripped the counter with both hands because I genuinely thought my legs were going to give out right there in front of that young woman. "Can you check one more property for me?" I asked. 221 Crane Street. The clerk typed it in. Same thing. Transferred to Linda Marie Whitfield. Same date. Same notary. Both properties. Everything Earl had left for Carly. Gone. I asked for certified copies of both transfer documents. The clerk printed them and handed them to me with a look on her face that told me she'd seen this kind of thing before. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with those documents spread out in front of me. My reading glasses kept fogging because I was crying and didn't realize it. My name was on both transfer documents. Dorothy Hargrave. Trustee. Signed and notarized. But I had never signed those papers. I had never seen those papers. And when I looked carefully at the signature on the bottom of each page, something was wrong. The D was too rounded, almost childlike. The loop on the Y in Dorothy was too tight, pinched in on itself. My real signature is loose and fast. Earl always teased me that I signed my name like I was late for something. Whoever forged my name had studied it carefully enough to get close. But not close enough for a woman who'd been writing that same name for 74 years and knew every curve of it by heart. That evening, Carly called me from Houston. She sounded upset. "Grandma, I asked Mom about the orchard again, and she told me it was sold to cover your medical bills. She said the rehab center cost more than insurance covered and there was no other option." I felt my stomach drop. My insurance had covered every penny of that rehab stay. Every single penny. Linda knew that. She'd handled the insurance paperwork herself. I didn't tell Carly what I'd found. Not yet. I needed more before I could say anything, because I knew the moment I opened my mouth, Linda would start spinning. She'd cry, she'd explain, she'd make herself the victim. And I wasn't going to give her that chance. The next morning, my neighbor Bev came over with a chicken casserole. Bev is 81, sharp as a razor, and misses nothing that happens on our street. We sat on the porch, and after a while, I mentioned that Linda had been helping with the trust paperwork while I was away. Bev got quiet. Then she said, "I probably should have told you this sooner. Back in March, I saw a woman pull up to your house with a briefcase. Linda let her in. They were inside for about an hour. When they came out, Linda was carrying a stack of papers and the woman had a notary stamp hanging from her lanyard." She paused. I figured it was just business. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Linda looked like someone who'd just gotten away with something. I thanked Bev. I asked her if she'd be willing to write that down, everything she'd seen, with the date and time, in her own words. She said yes without hesitation. "I've known you 40 years, Dorothy. Whatever you need." And that was when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a paperwork error. My daughter had walked into my house while I was lying in a hospital bed and forged my name to steal my granddaughter's inheritance. But what I didn't know yet was just how far she'd gone, and how long she'd been planning it. I decided to confront Linda directly. Part of me still hoped there was an explanation I hadn't thought of. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon and told her I wanted to talk about the trust. She came over that evening, walked in with a bottle of wine and a smile. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd studied those forged documents, and poured herself a glass like nothing in the world was wrong. "Mama, what's on your mind?" she said, tilting her head the way she does when she's performing concern. "I went to the county clerk's office," I said. "I saw the deed transfers. Both of them." Linda didn't flinch. She took a sip of wine and set the glass down carefully. "Right," she said. "We talked about that before your surgery. Don't you remember? You said you wanted to simplify the trust and put everything under one name. We went through the documents together at the hospital." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Mama, you were on a lot of medication. Heavy painkillers. I'm not surprised you don't remember. But I promise you, you signed those papers. I watched you do it." For a moment, and I'm ashamed to admit this, I almost believed her. That's how good she was. The sincerity in her voice. The softness in her eyes. The way she held my hand like she was comforting a confused old woman. And I think that was the cruelest part. She wasn't just lying. She was making me doubt my own mind. She was turning my age and my medication into weapons against me. I pulled my hand back. "And the orchard?" I said. "Carly says you told her it was sold to pay for my medical bills." Linda's expression shifted, just a tiny tightening around her mouth. The kind of micro-movement that would fool most people but not a woman who'd watched that face change from infancy. I simplified it for her. She's young. She doesn't understand how these things work. The trust needed restructuring, and the easiest way to explain it was by lying to her. I said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Linda's jaw tightened. I was protecting her from getting confused. Just like I'm trying to protect you right now. These things are complicated, Mama, and you're not. She stopped herself. But I heard the word she swallowed. She was about to say I wasn't sharp enough to understand. She stood up, kissed me on the forehead like I was a child being sent to bed, and walked out the front door. The wine bottle sat on the table, half empty. I didn't touch it. I sat at that table for a long time after she left. I stared at the place where her hand had been and thought about how a person can raise a child, give them everything, love them through every fever and heartbreak, and still not know what they're capable of when they think no one is watching. The next afternoon, I went up to the attic. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was looking for Earl. That sounds strange, I know. But when I miss him, I go up there and sit with his things, his old fishing hat, his toolbox, the boxes of photographs from when the kids were small. And on that day, I needed him more than I had since the funeral. I picked up his Bible from the shelf where it had been sitting since the day he died. It was a worn King James with a cracked leather cover, held together with a rubber band. Earl wasn't a highlighter or a note-taker, but he used that Bible as a filing cabinet. He'd tuck receipts between Genesis chapters, birthday cards between the Psalms, newspaper clippings in Revelation. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and started flipping through it, letting the loose papers fall into my lap. And then I found it. Tucked between the pages of Proverbs, chapter 3, the one about trusting in the Lord with all your heart, pressed flat like a dried flower, was a folded document. I opened it carefully. It was the original deed to the peach orchard. Not a copy. The original, with the county seal and Earl's signature at the bottom. And clipped to the back of it, in Earl's handwriting on a piece of yellow-lined notebook paper, was a note. It said, "This land is for Carly. Don't let anyone take it. Earl, June 2019. I held that piece of paper in both hands and cried. Not because I was sad. Because Earl had known. Somehow, for years before any of this happened, sitting on that porch with his sweet tea and his pen, he had looked down the road and seen what was coming. Maybe he noticed the way Linda talked about the land. Maybe he just knew his daughter better than I wanted to admit. He'd hidden the original deed in the one place nobody would ever think to look, inside a dead man's Bible on an attic shelf, and he'd written a note that said exactly what needed to be said. Like he was reaching forward through time to hand me the one thing I'd need most. And that's when the full weight of what Linda had done hit me. She hadn't just transferred the properties. She had manufactured documents. The signatures on those transfers weren't mine, because I had never signed them. They were forgeries. My daughter hadn't just redirected assets. She had committed fraud. She had forged my name, lied to the county, lied to a notary, lied to her own daughter, and tried to make me think I was losing my mind so I wouldn't question any of it. That Bible sat in my lap like it weighed 100 pounds. And for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't doubting myself. I knew exactly what had happened. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't know it yet, but what I'd find out next would prove that Linda had been laying the groundwork for this long before I ever fell off that porch. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're new here, this channel collects real stories from online forums and Reddit, and we take a close look at the psychology behind the people in them. If that's something that speaks to you, I'd love for you to subscribe. Now, back to where we were. The Monday after I found Earl's Bible, I called Marcus Webb. Marcus was a student of mine back in 1987, a scrawny kid with oversized glasses who used to read chapter books during recess while the other kids played kickball. He grew up to be a real estate attorney with an office on Pearl Street downtown. When I called, his secretary put me on hold, but the moment Marcus heard my name, he picked up the line himself. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "It has been a very long time." I told him I needed help. He said, "Come in this afternoon. I'll clear my schedule." I sat in Marcus's office with the manila folder on my lap. Inside, the certified copies of the fraudulent deed transfers, the original deed from Earl's Bible, Earl's handwritten note, and Bev's written statement. Marcus went through everything slowly. He held the original deed up to the light. He placed my real signature next to the forged ones and studied them with a magnifying glass. He read Earl's note twice. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked up at me and said, "Mrs. Hargrave, these signatures are forgeries. The pen pressure is different, the letter spacing is inconsistent, and the notary stamp on these transfers doesn't match any registered notary in Jefferson County." He leaned forward. "Whoever filed these used an out-of-county notary, probably to avoid a local paper trail." I told him it was my daughter. He paused. Then he nodded slowly and said, "I'm sorry. But if you want to fix this, we can fix this. The evidence is very strong. Marcus filed a formal inquiry with the county regarding the fraudulent transfers. He also pulled the records of the notary who had stamped those documents, a woman from Hardin County named Sheila Pratt who ran a mobile notary service. When Marcus contacted her, she was cooperative. She told him Linda had come to her office, presented the documents already signed, and asked her to notarize them. The woman told me she was the trustee, Sheila said. She had identification. I had no reason to doubt her. But Linda wasn't the trustee. I was. And that lie was now documented in Sheila's own words. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered everything with the patience of a woman who has spent 4 decades organizing lesson plans. Marcus prepared a legal summary of the fraud. Bev refined her statement, added the exact date and time, and had it notarized. I pulled the original trust document Earl and I had filed, the one that clearly named me as sole trustee and spelled out the equal split between Linda and Carly. I had a folder full of documents that told one very clear story: my daughter had stolen from her own child. Now came the question of when and how. Marcus advised me to file everything quietly and let the courts handle it through proper channels. He said it was the cleanest legal path. But I'm 74 years old. I've watched people hide behind lawyers and paperwork and continuances my whole life. I've seen good people wait years for justice that should have taken weeks. And I knew that if I let this drag through a courtroom for 12 to 18 months, Linda would hire her own attorney, spin a story that made her the caring daughter and me the confused elderly mother who couldn't keep her facts straight, and drag this through enough hearings that Carly might give up out of exhaustion. Linda was already halfway to convincing people I was losing my faculties. I wasn't going to hand her a stage to perform on. So I made a decision. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Every year, without fail, Linda hosts the family dinner at her house. It's the event she plans for months in advance. The good china comes out of the cabinet, the silver gets polished, the dining room table gets an extension leaf. Her husband Gerald would be there. Her church friends, Patty, Diane, and Carol, always came for dessert and coffee afterward. Earl's brother Frank and his wife Joan would drive in from Lufkin, the way they had every year for 2 decades. And Carly always came home from Houston. It was the one day of the year when every single person Linda cared about impressing would be sitting under one roof, at one table, with nowhere to look but at each other. I called Carly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving and told her I needed her to trust me. I didn't explain everything, not yet. I wanted to protect her from carrying this weight until the moment was right. I just said, be at Thanksgiving dinner. Sit near me. And when I ask you to stand up, you stand up. Don't ask why. Just do it. Carly was quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment. I could hear her breathing. Then she said, very softly, Grandma, whatever this is, I'm with you. 100%. That girl has more of her grandfather in her than she will ever know. I organized the manila folder the night before, sitting at my kitchen table under the lamp. Original deed first, then Earl's note, then the forged transfers, then Marcus's legal summary with the signature comparison, then Bev's notarized statement, and finally Sheila Pratt's admission. 6 documents. Each one a nail in a coffin Linda had built herself. I put the folder in my good leather purse, the one Earl bought me for our anniversary. On Thanksgiving morning, I got dressed in my blue cardigan, put on the pearl earrings Earl gave me for our 40th anniversary, and looked at myself in the hallway mirror for a long time. Then I drove across town to my daughter's house. I walked in that door knowing exactly what was going to happen. And for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't afraid. But the moment I sat down at that table and looked at Linda's face, I realized she had no idea what was coming. Not a clue. The turkey was carved. The sweet potatoes were passed. Gerald said grace, and everyone bowed their heads. I kept my eyes open. Linda waited until everyone had food on their plates before she made her announcement. She tapped her wine glass with a butter knife. I just want to say a few words about the family, she began. She talked about how difficult it had been managing things since Earl's passing. She talked about sacrifice. And then she pulled out her stack of papers and said, I've been working with a financial advisor to restructure the family trust. Going forward, everything will be consolidated under my management. It's what makes sense for everyone. She looked at Carly. I know this isn't what you expected, sweetheart. But sometimes the adults have to make the hard calls. Carly didn't respond. She looked at me. I gave her a small nod. I reached under the table and pulled the manila folder out of my purse. I set it on the table next to my plate, right between the cranberry sauce and the bread basket. Before anyone agrees to anything, I said, keeping my voice steady, I think the family should see a few things. Linda looked at the folder. Her smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Mama, what is that? I opened the folder. I took out the first document, the original deed to the peach orchard, the one from Earl's Bible, and laid it flat on the table so everyone could see the county seal and Earl's signature. This, I said, is the original deed to the Hargrave orchard. Earl filed it with the family trust in 2018. It names me as sole trustee and splits the property equally between Linda and Carly. Then I pulled out the second document, the fraudulent transfer, and laid it beside the original. And this is the document filed in March of this year, while I was in rehab recovering from hip surgery. It transfers the orchard entirely into Linda's name. It has my signature on the bottom. I paused. Except I didn't sign it. I have never seen this document before in my life. The table went silent. Gerald put down his fork. Earl's brother Frank leaned forward and pulled both documents toward him to compare the signatures. Patty from church set her wine glass down. I laid down 3 more pages, one at a time. Marcus's legal analysis comparing the real signatures with the forgeries. Bev's notarized statement about seeing the notary at my house. And the statement from Sheila Pratt confirming that Linda had presented herself as the trustee, which she was not. Finally, I placed Earl's handwritten note in the center of the table, right where everyone could read it. This land is for Carly. Don't let anyone take it. Frank picked up that note. I watched his face change as he recognized his brother's handwriting. He set it down and looked straight at Linda. Linda's reaction happened in 3 stages, and I watched every single one of them because I'd earned the right to. First came the automatic smile, the defensive reflex she'd used her whole life to charm her way out of tight corners. Then the smile flickered, wavered, and died like a candle in a draft. Her hand drifted to her wine glass. She picked it up, and I watched her grip tighten until her knuckles went bone white. Then the glass slipped from her fingers and hit the tablecloth. Red wine spread across the white linen in a slow, dark stain that crept toward the centerpiece. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody said a word. The only sound in that dining room was the tick of the grandfather clock Gerald kept in the hallway. Mama, she whispered. You don't understand. I understand completely, I said. And so does every person at this table. I turned to Carly. Stand up, sweetheart. Carly pushed back her chair and walked around the table to stand beside me. I took her hand and faced the room. This is Earl's granddaughter. And she is going to receive exactly what her grandfather wanted her to have. Every acre. Every dollar. That is not negotiable. Linda looked around the table, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for a single ally. Gerald was reading the legal summary with both hands flat on the table. Patty, Diane, and Carol were studying their plates. Frank was holding Earl's note. Not one person at that table was willing to meet her eyes. 3 things happened in the weeks after that Thanksgiving. First, Marcus filed a formal petition to reverse the fraudulent property transfers. With the original deed, the forged documents, Sheila Pratt's statement, and Bev's testimony, the case was overwhelming. By late January, the orchard and the Crane Street rental property were restored to the Hargrave family trust, exactly where Earl had placed them. Carly's equal share was fully reinstated. Marcus handled every piece of paperwork and charged me half his normal rate. Consider it a thank you for teaching me to read, he said. Second, Gerald filed for legal separation the week before Christmas. I learned this from Frank, who heard it from Gerald's brother at a hardware store. Gerald told his family he'd had no idea what Linda had done, and that when he read those documents at the Thanksgiving table, he felt physically sick. He said he couldn't look at her the same way. I don't know what happens with their marriage. That's between them. But Gerald didn't stay silent after what he saw. Third, Linda's church group, the women she had coffee with every Wednesday, the ones she sat with in the third pew every Sunday, the ones whose approval she worked harder for than anyone's, quietly stopped calling. No confrontation. No angry words. They just stopped inviting her. Linda had built her entire social identity around being the responsible daughter, the devoted family manager. In one evening, every person who believed that story watched it collapse. And in a town like Beaumont, that silence is louder than any courtroom verdict. Linda called me once, about 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Her voice sounded flat, hollow, like someone reading from a script she'd rehearsed but didn't believe anymore. She said, "You humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. You destroyed my life, Mama." I sat in my kitchen, looking out the window at the spot where Earl used to park his truck, and I said, "No, Linda. You humiliated yourself. I just made sure the people you'd been lying to were in the room when the truth finally came out." She hung up without another word. We haven't spoken since. Some days that hurts more than I expected. Most days it doesn't. Carly moved back to Beaumont in the spring. She took a nursing position at Baptist Hospital, just 15 minutes from the orchard, and started spending her weekends out on the property. She fixed the fence Earl had been meaning to repair. She painted the tool shed. She even got the old irrigation lines running again with help from a neighbor's son who knew about plumbing. One warm Saturday in April, she and I drove out there with a truck full of new peach tree saplings from the nursery in Vidor. We spent the whole morning in the dirt, digging holes and planting saplings in the rows that had gone bare over the past couple of years. Carly worked in her grandfather's old gardening gloves, the brown leather ones with the worn-out thumbs. They were 3 sizes too big for her hands, and she kept laughing every time they slipped off while she was trying to pat down the soil around a new root ball. At one point, she stopped digging and looked at me. "Grandma," she said, "do you think Grandpa knew this would happen?" I thought about that note in the Bible. I thought about Earl sitting on the porch in June of 2019, tucking that deed between the pages of Proverbs. "I think he knew you'd need protecting," I said. "And he trusted me to do it." Carly smiled. He was right. A full year after everything happened, Carly hosted Thanksgiving at the farmhouse on the orchard property. She'd spent a week cleaning the place up, scrubbing the kitchen floors, hanging new curtains, setting out mason jars with wildflowers on every surface. It was a smaller table than Linda used to set, but it was full. Me, Carly, Bev from next door, Marcus and his wife Denise, and Frank and Joan who'd driven in from Lufkin the way they had every year for 2 decades. Carly set the table with the blue and white plates Earl and I had used for 40 years, the ones with the little chip on the salad plate that Earl always said gave it character. She made sweet potato pie from my recipe, the one she'd been asking me to teach her since she was 12. And when we all sat down and Frank said grace, I looked around the table and something settled deep inside me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. This was the same holiday. The same meal. The same tradition. But this time, I wasn't sitting in silence with a secret in my purse. I was sitting in a room full of people who knew the truth and chose to be here anyway. And my granddaughter was at the head of the table, in her grandfather's chair, laughing about something Bev had said about the pecan harvest. That was the moment I knew it was truly over. Not because Linda was gone. But because Carly was exactly where she was supposed to be. I've thought a lot about why Linda did what she did. And I think it comes down to something that sounds simple but isn't simple at all. Linda spent her whole life measuring herself by other people's approval. She needed to be seen as the successful one, the capable one, the one in charge. And when Earl set up that trust and split everything equally between her and Carly, a 23-year-old who hadn't built anything yet, Linda didn't see fairness. She saw a judgment. She saw her own father saying someone else was just as important as she was. And she couldn't live with that. So she didn't just take the money and the land. She erased Carly's name from the story altogether. Because it was never about the inheritance. It was about proving she was the one who mattered most. And here's the thing about people who build their whole identity on being the most important person in every room. The moment you stop feeding that hunger, they fall apart. Linda didn't lose because I found the documents. She lost because she sat at a table surrounded by the people whose opinions meant everything to her and discovered that not a single one of them was willing to take her side. She'd spent decades building a reputation. And it dissolved in 90 seconds. That's how fragile a life built on other people's admiration really is. I'm 75 now. My hip is holding up. The peach trees Carly and I planted are starting to bloom, pale pink against the green. And Earl's Bible is back on the shelf in our living room, not in the attic anymore. Carly moved it downstairs. She says she likes knowing it's close. If you're listening to this and you recognized something in this story, a family member who rewrites history, someone who makes you question your own memory, a person who smiles while they take everything from under you, I want you to know something. Trust what you see. Trust what you know. And don't wait for someone else to stand up for what's right. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives at a Thanksgiving table, carried in by a 74-year-old woman with a manila folder and her dead husband's Bible. This story was collected from an online forum and modified for privacy. If it spoke to you, I'd love for you to subscribe and join this community. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these stories to light, and there are always more to tell. This is Revenge Stories, and I'm glad you were here. If you enjoyed this one, there are more stories showing on your screen right now. Come back soon. I'll see you in the next one.